Yeah, I just yeah. Anyway, I'm sure that if you had the private key, you would be able to pull off all the things like ARP spoofing and so on. However, we have some discussions about this, and we are not releasing the private key. I'm very sorry to say that to you guys, because I know that you probably would like it very much. But again, we also wanted to make sure that we were going to be able to prevent harm from this certificate, because we want to make the internet a more secure place. And yeah, I know, I believe that too. That's what gets a laugh out of them. Great, not to shout one thing. So like I said earlier, the CA cert is backdated to 2004. So with the exception of really, really buggy software, you should not have to worry that even if it were to escape into the wild, that it would actually be useful for real-time, 100% secure phishing or things like this. We've also contacted a couple of vendors in advance in order to give them the fingerprint and the certificate and a proof of concept for them so that they can see that this is real and they can blacklist our certificate. You might be able to blacklist the certificate yourself. There's been some infrastructure in place for this, different tools for Debian, for example, that are floating around on the internet. You could plug in the fingerprint for the certificate as well. So,
all right, so the obvious thing that the certificate authorities could do with our certificate is try to revoke it. This is one of the responsibilities. If they issue a illegitimate certificate, they have to revoke it. However, it turns out that our certificate is not revocable. This was not intentional. We only figured this out once we had already acquired the certificate. But apparently both the CRL and the OCSP protocols, which are used for revocation, rely on the certificate itself to tell the browser where to check for revocation. There's a special URL that the browser uses to contact the revocation server. So if the certificate does not have such a URL, the browser just doesn't know how to check for revocation, so it does not. Our cert doesn't include this URL just because we had to fit everything into 500 bytes, and we didn't have space to include any of these extra extensions. But even if you could get revocation, if for some reason we had this revocation URL, the fact is a lot of browsers, Firefox 2 and also Internet Explorer 6, don't check for revocation by default. Apparently this is because of infrastructure problems, load on the certificate authorities. They couldn't figure out how to make servers that can withstand all of these internet users actually checking for revocation. So a lot of older browsers don't check for revocation. The newer browsers do check, but they still have the problem with not being able to find the revocation URL in our certificate. The only thing that could possibly help to check for revocation is this option that both Firefox and Internet Explorer have. It allows people to set up their own OCSP servers which respond to revocation requests. And large organizations can do this. For example, they set up their own server, they configure all of their browsers to ask this server for revocation. And then the browser always asks that server and ignores the URL that comes from the certificate itself, or the lack of URL in the certificate. However, this is not something that individual users could do. So the revocation is still an open problem. And revocation for SSL certificates has been a pretty serious issue, even regardless of our work. So you can't really rely on revocation. EV-certs are something that will help you if you actually understand the difference between EV-certs and normal certs, if you know where to look to find that difference. They're called extended validation certs, and they have more stringent requirements. And the EV certificate authorities have never used MD5 to issue these certs. So if you find a certificate chain that ends with a EV certificate authority, then it could not have been attacked using this method. However, users don't really understand what EV means, and it's kind of hard to tell whether you're looking at a normal cert or an EV cert. For example,
Firefox 2, when you would go to an SSL website, it would make the URL bar gold, right? So we knew to teach people, look for the padlock, look for the gold URL bar. We know that we have a secure site. So that became like a value add thing. This like simple UI indicator that was like almost helping to get people to even understand that they were using something that was called security on the internet. And basically in Firefox 3 and other certificate aware programs, usually they have like a special little box to the left-hand side of the URL that says the company's name in maybe like green, and then the URL bar isn't colored anymore. So depending on which web browser your grandmother or grandfather is using, you tell them, oh, you look for the green box in the upper left-hand corner of the URL bar, or you look for the gold strip. And maybe that's kind of difficult to tell people. Yeah, and on the Mac, it's on the bottom. So like depending on the browser, it's just like, it's kind of a disaster. And of course, the EV certificates exist alongside these other certificate authorities, and you're really only as secure as the weakest link. And since there aren't constraints on what the Brazilian government certificate authority can issue, for example, or RapidSSL, if any one of them goes, they all go. And that's pretty bad. And so extended validation is certainly a good road into the future, but it still has the problems of the commercial X509 certificate authority industry.
Yes, so now we're concerned, we did this attack, but might anybody else redo our attack? Well, we've made some figures, and with some further optimizations, we actually estimate that our attack can be done for $2,000 renting computing power at Amazon EC2, and just a single day, so that's available for anybody. And having this in mind, yeah, we want to take extra precautions to prevent anybody else to just easily redo our attack. So for that reason, we are not going to release our collision finding implementation or our improved methods for doing the chosen prefix collision until we feel it's safe to do so. And we've talked to the affected CAs, and they've acknowledged that they will switch to SHA-1 very, very soon. So that's very good news for us, that we've made a good impact in better security on the internet. But there's another question. I mean, our paper has been available since 2007. So anybody could have already implemented everything that's in the paper, maybe even made the same improvements as we did, and have then also did this attack for just like $2,000 on the Amazon EC2 system. Well, how can we tell if this happened? Well, there is no way to tell. The theory has been public since 2007, and our legitimate certificate is just, it's completely legitimate. We own the domain. It's just completely valid certificate request, and we followed proper protocol, and there is nothing you can see at the certificate that there is something wrong there. So there is an open question from, can we trust CAs that have used MD5 to sign certificates this year or even years before? Can we still trust them? And that's something we can't answer.
So where do we go from here? Well, our attack is kind of interesting, I think, we hope. Somebody doesn't agree. So we have done this attack, and the certificate authorities will switch to SHA-1 fairly soon. It's kind of interesting that it actually took them. It took a real practical attack that was actually executed to get them to finally switch. Apparently publishing the theory and publishing all these papers that prove that it's possible to do it was not enough, which is kind of sad. But one thing that we would recommend for certificate authorities and just any software system is to implement defense in depth. For example, if RapidSSL had random serial numbers, which some other certificate authorities do, or if they had implemented a random delay when signing certs, which is a commonly recommended best practice when doing crypto and signing operations, we would not have been able to do this attack. And nobody else would have been able to do this attack using this method, because you cannot predict something that's random, if it's random enough. These defense in depth techniques are even more important when you think about what could happen in the future. I mean, there are people who are working on second pre-image attacks against MD5. There's also people who are working on SHA-1 collisions. And those things might or might not happen, but if they do happen, they will probably happen overnight. So what do we do when we wake up one day and suddenly SHA-1 is no longer secure, and you can do the exact same attack against certificate authorities that use SHA-1, which at this point is practically 100% of them? Well, it turns out that dropping support for these cryptographic primitives is very, very hard. You have a lot of backwards compatibility issues, a lot of clients that cannot be upgraded. Maybe you have mobile devices that just have a hardware implementation of an algorithm, and they're not even powerful enough to do it in software. So there's just no way to replace a hash function with another one without replacing the entire device. Also, who is responsible for the cost of replacing these devices? Do users have to go and buy a new phone every time that a cryptographic hash function gets broken? So these are open questions. We don't really have very good answers to them. Random serial numbers and random delay when signing certs are definitely things we recommend that certificate authorities do to stop this attack. But definitely a lot more defense in depth research is needed on how to prevent other cryptographic attacks on actually becoming from actually becoming practical. Do you want to add something about that?
One thing that happened with Debian, and sorry to beat on you guys so hard, is that a lot of CAs were able to find that keys were weak. They were able to detect that the keys were weak, which, as we've already said, is not really possible here, or we don't know how to do it exactly. CAs offered reissues. They said, you generated this with a bad version of OpenSSL. This is clearly not your fault, but we don't want to tarnish our brand. We want things to be something more positive, so we'll reissue this certificate. And so, in theory, the certificate authorities that bear some responsibility for using broken hash functions 4 years after they were broken could, for example, reissue certificates using a secure hashing function, and that would be reasonable. Now, who knows if they'll actually do that? But that's something that could be done that would be kind of useful. And it's not so simple as to simply remove the certificate authority roots that issue with MD5, because essentially you would get rid of the only useful property that the CAs offer, and about 30% of the internet potentially would have invalid SSL certificates according to your browser. So it's a little bit difficult to simply move forward from here as well. So I was going to take the slide about, has someone else done this, because I'm a group conspiracy theorist or something, according to Alex. And for me, I think that it's not unreasonable to imagine that well-funded adversaries are also very intelligent and could do this. I don't know. I certainly don't trust any certificates that use MD5 anymore at all. So, at least, for the end leaf certificate, which I've already said doesn't matter anyway, but that's the best you can do. We talked to some companies that helped us talk to the affected certificate authority, and they're going to switch to SHA-1 sometime soon. So they have there's a window of opportunity there. So don't take it. Yeah, or whatever. But yeah, you'll do what you're going to do. So in theory, with SHA-1, this is something that is going to stop until SHA-1 falls, and it might very well. And in this case, we really think that it was necessary to practically demonstrate this attack and do a real attack against an actual certificate authority. I'm hesitant to use the term attack, but essentially, we wanted to show that it was possible, because it seems like in the industry, people, or the computer security industry, people generally are not looking at academia to see what problems are already solved. And so even though there are some companies that have really